Well, it's happened again. I don't really know what to say. So I've been waiting for this day for years. Every time I've tried to come to this location in misty, foggy conditions, two things have happened. Well, one or two things have happened. Either the weather forecast has been completely wrong and there's been no mist or fog at all, or as soon as I've got to the location, the mist has lifted and it's ruined the photography for me. But today, I'm quietly confident that I'm going to get what I want. The location I'm going to is a piece of remote woodland up on the Dartmoor National Park. It's known for being particularly creepy, particularly mysterious, and has loads of legends attached to it. And I really want to capture it in these murky, damp, dismal conditions. I'm not quite sure yet how I'm going to react to it. I'm not quite sure yet how the landscape is going to speak to me, so to speak, and what I'm going to try and do to record it. I don't know if I'm going to go for light and airy and diffused backgrounds, or whether I'm going to go very dark and gloomy. It might be a mixture of both. But what I want to get from today is not just one photograph. I want to get a set of photographs. I want this to be like a mini one-day project where I produce a small portfolio of work showing this area to the very best that I think it can be shown. So before the mist lifts, let's crack on and see if we can get there before everything sort of goes bad for us. I'll see you up at the woods. Well, the mist is holding up, which, as you can imagine, I'm absolutely delighted about. But in typical sort of like landscape photographer fashion, I'm now concerned about the density of it and whether or not it's actually going to be thick enough to mask the sort of tangle that is this woodland that I'm visiting. Oh, sorry, bit bumpy ground. But the thing is that at the end of the day, that's what landscape photography is about, isn't it? It's about sort of overcoming challenges and various things, and that's what we're going to have to do. So we just have to compose our pictures so we make the best of the misty conditions that we have got. Of course, it's also possible that during the course of the day, in the few hours that we're going to be here, that the mist will actually change in density and thicker banks will roll in, followed by thinner banks, and it could be a changing sort of environment all the time. So we'll just have to see what happens, oopsie, as things progress. So if I can get there without falling over again or slipping, that would be absolutely fantastic. Two years I've been waiting to get back up here and shoot in these conditions, and boy, it's been worth the wait. The landscape is every bit as mysterious, enchanting and beautiful all at the same time as I thought it would be. It is of course famous, this is Wistmans Wood, it is famous for featuring in Arthur Conan Doyle's Hounds of the Baskervilles, and you can see why. It's not quite as dark and gloomy as I expected, but nevertheless it is gloomy enough. I would have liked to have had a little bit thicker mist, because as you can see it's actually still quite bright, and it would be better if you could see a little bit less of the background in some of the pictures that I'm looking at. But even still, it is fantastic. I think I found my first composition, so we're going to work on that. I've had to cover the camera up in between shots because it's quite sort of damp weather really. I just want to try and keep everything dry. We're going to be here for a few hours. So although it's not particularly wet, I thought if I start protecting everything now, it'll work better in the future. The position I've got the camera in, it's kind of balanced on some rocks, and I've got to sit on the rock that the camera's on to try and actually sort things out, because this area is particularly strewn in boulders, and it's really difficult to try and get a clean sort of position where you can just stand and take your pictures without contorting into various different positions. So I'm going to shoot a bit of video for you through the viewfinder on the 5D, just so you can see what my composition looks like, and I'll talk you through it. So what you can see in this picture, and I'll put it up on the screen for you now so you can see the video, is I'm shooting through this twisted oak right in front of me, and the way that the tree's twisted, it creates this circle in the middle that you can view right through into the trees in the background. Now the main subject is this twisted oak in the foreground. It's not intended to be the tree in the background itself. That's just something there to give you some depth to look through. I'm not entirely sure yet with these pictures until I get home and process them whether this is going to be a colour or a monochrome set of work. It'll actually work as both. It just depends which ones I prefer and what I want to work on this time. So the idea with this was that the tree would create the frame around the outside, but I'm not quite sure what the crop's going to be either. I've tried a square crop, a 5/4 crop, and neither one of them seemed to work really well, so I've gone back to what I've got here, and which is the standard 3:2 for the camera, and we're going to take the picture with that. So let's have a look at a few camera settings. So I've actually decided to take the picture at 2 different apertures. I'm going to shoot at f11, and I'm also going to shoot at f5.6. And what's going to change here, what's going to decide on how I do it, is when I do the processing of how much blur I want in the background, if I want any blur in the background. Because it could well be that it works out better having the background slightly sharper, and we won't really know that until we've worked it out. Now we've got to be really careful with the exposure because there's a lot of white sky in it, and a lot of shadowy areas as well. And although the contrast is fairly low, certainly what we don't want to do is end up with a situation where we've got blown out highlights, because it will really kill these misty, foggy conditions. So I'm shooting at 1/8 of a second, f11. That puts the histogram pretty much in the middle of the frame. So we're going to use that as our base exposure. I've got my 2-second timer on, so I don't have to worry about carrying around a cable release and everything in these conditions as well. So let's take this photograph and okay, so there we are. Yep, that looks reasonably well exposed. I actually quite like the composition now it's up on the preview. See what you think of it. So it's happened again. I really don't know what to say. The mist cleared. As quick as it was here, it was gone. Now I do know by weather forecasts that the cloud base was supposed to lift from 200 metres up to 400. And we're well above that, so in theory that shouldn't have happened. But you can never guarantee what happens with the weather forecast. But just on the hope that it will change and something's going to happen in the sort of next few minutes or whatever, or next half an hour, I thought I'll stop and have an early lunch. And hopefully by the time I've had something to eat and a hot cup of coffee, maybe something will have improved and the weather conditions will have changed again and we'll have a bit more mist to work with. If not, the next time you see me, I'll be in the office. And what we'll do is we'll go through the editing of the photograph that I took this morning and put that on there as well. So not to worry, there's lots more to come in the video. It's always quite hard to tell with landscape photography and what's going to happen with the weather conditions, but from what I can tell at the moment, although I've waited around for something like 40 minutes, I don't think it's really going to change much or get much better. The cloud base is starting to drop again a little bit, but it's still quite bright, and I don't think we're going to get the misty conditions that we had first thing this morning. It is a shame although I was probably being a little bit too ambitious, hoping to shoot practically a whole body of work in one morning. But we have got one good image that we can try and go home and process. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to crack on, get back home and process this image and see what it looks like. So join me back in Lightroom and Photoshop. So here we are back in the office. I think before we start looking at the actual photograph itself, I want to sort of share something with you and ask you a few questions as well. And the thing I want to talk about really is when we talk about editing our photographs, what is it that we really mean? What is it we're really talking about? Have you ever asked yourself that question? You see, it's easy to load a photograph into Photoshop, Lightroom, or whatever editing software you use and start moving the sliders around until you get what you think is a better photograph than was originally captured by your camera. But what do you actually mean by better? What is a better photograph? Who says the one that the camera captured isn't already the best one? We don't have to edit absolutely everything. So what is it we're trying to actually achieve and do? I think the process begins out in the field. So if we take the time out in the field to actually compose the photograph correctly, expose it the way that we want it to be, to sit and quietly absorb the landscape around us and understand what it is within each photograph, within each scene that we want to actually get across to our viewer, then we're halfway there. And when we sit there thinking about the editing process as well at the taking stage, it makes it so much easier. The editing of your photographs has to become an integral part of the whole process and not just something you do afterwards to improve your photograph. In summary, what I'm saying is take your photographs considering the editing at the same time. So let's have a look at the images up on the screen. So I'll put both images up on the screen, the finished picture and my original one. So the one on the left hand side is the raw image that I produced out in the field. Let's talk about the crop of the actual image itself. So the image, I've put both images up on the screen side by side so you can see the original and the final. And in the original raw file on the right hand side of the screen as I look at it, there is, it's very noticeable that there's a lot of space around the outside edges. It's much more open and airy sort of feeling image, partly to do with the lightness of it and how it's actually coming across. But if we just go back to thinking about how we've cropped it, for me, the white areas around the outside edges were a little bit of a distraction. And the total picture for me was really just drawing your eye in and through and into this picture and into that tangle in behind. And that's what I wanted to emphasize more in this image. So I went for a 5x4 crop. Let's just get the final image up on the screen and we'll start talking about the other elements. So if we begin with exposure, on the exposure of this image, what I actually did was I just wanted to make it feel a little bit darker, a little bit moodier than it actually came across on the raw image. So I've reduced the exposure by about 0.7, so not even a full stop, just a small amount. I've also reduced the contrast a little down to 15, and the reason for that was basically what I wanted to do was try and have this soft, muted feel to it. I didn't want to introduce too much contrast. Having said that, I have gone on to lighten the highlights a little bit. I've gone on to lighten the whites, and I've also gone on to reduce the blacks even more. And there's a reason for that. The main reason is to get this moody sort of strange sort of like feel to it that I've managed to achieve. So let's talk about the colour next. So the colour photograph allows us to manipulate people's moods and feelings and reactions to the image by playing with the different tones and different colours that we've got. Now the first thing I did in this picture was to desaturate the yellows and the greens. And the reason I did that was because I didn't want the greens to be too punchy. I wanted to sort of drag that down a little bit. And once again, that just sort of adds to that dreary sort of moody feeling that I think I've managed to create in the image. But I wanted the blues to come out. So I've boosted the blues, the saturation of the blues and the aquas, only +11 and +6, just enough just to add a little bit of tinge of blue coldness into the shadow areas. But I also wanted to play with the highlights, and I've done that by using the color grading wheel. And in color grading here, you'll see that I've just picked a blue tone and very, very slightly just reduced increase the saturation of the blues in there, and also drag the luminance right the way back down to make those blue areas feel very misty and dark, and just emphasize what we've got on it when we do that. The rest of my edit is really quite simple. My lens corrections are pretty much a standard correction that I put in for everything. And sharpening as well. I mean, sharpening is very much a personal choice. And I have, on one of the final images, increased the sharpness a little bit. In fact, if you have a look at this image, there's one more change I've actually made to it. One was the sharpness, and also in the bottom of the frame, there's a little white flower which I've taken out because I found it a little distracting and drawing your eye down there a bit more. So I finally got rid of that. And finally, just before I show you this last image and we wrap up, I think it's worth noting that you don't always get it right the first time. So when you're editing your images, why don't you come back to them a bit later on and have a look at them the next day or even a few days time. And this just gives you a little bit of time just to get used to the image. And quite often when you go back, you see things that you didn't say the first time. So here we have both images back up on the screen again. And it takes us back to our original question. And the original question was, whether or not, what do you want to get from editing? And what is it that actually you're trying to achieve? Well, for me, it's always about enhancing what was there by trying to tell the story and get the ideas across to the viewers, or even just for my own sake, just to make sure that I've recorded everything that I wanted to. And for me in this image, I do believe I've achieved that. I have got that cool, soft feeling, that dark feeling, the coolness of it, of the mist. I have managed to do that and use this tree as a window into another world beyond where I wanted to take the viewers. I hope you kind of get what I'm trying to say about editing in this video, and that you found the whole thing interesting. So I'm just going to leave you with the final image, and then I'll see you in the next video sometime in the near future.